which I think have been particularly interesting and informative when we look back. The first is the extent to which we actually require some degree of normality, whatever that normality might be. Routine and familiarity give us a framework, a familiar territory from which we can attach adaptations and improvisations when we need to, so that we don't need to plan every novel sequence of everyday experience and action from scratch. In our minds, cognitively, we could logically reconcile many of the strange and unusual things we were encountering during the crisis. The fact that the streets were empty, that there were few pedestrians, if any at all, that there was no traffic, that people were wearing masks and giving each other a wide berth. We also knew that we were working in unfamiliar ways, using Zoom and Microsoft Teams in place of familiar routines in familiar contexts. In fact, a rather bizarre combination of professional business conversation and domestic dining room or bedroom furniture. Okay, we can take all that on board at a conscious level, but only at a cost. At a deeper, subconscious, instinctive level, these strange and unfamiliar situational discrepancies erode our well-being. We became more disoriented than we thought by these structural changes to the backdrop of our day-to-day lives. The disappearance of the supportive, taken for granted familiar framework took a toll. And this is cumulative, so add in or take away the daily commute routine, the suspension of both professional and amateur sports, the queuing up to shop, socialization habits, and the rest. And to the subconscious mind, this looks catastrophic. It's little wonder that the initial appeal, the excitement, raised levels of awareness and self-satisfaction of coping successfully with disaster eventually eroded. Rethinking the we're all in this together joys of isolation, discovering the downsides of working from home, and longing for the old normal. The second interesting and informative point that the virus has brought to everyone's notice is just how extraordinarily different we are from one another. We saw people in our families, in our neighbourhoods across the country and even internationally, reacting in extremely variable ways. Everything from demonstrations about too severe shutdowns at one extreme to a laissez-faire, almost just let things roll approach at the other. As you walked around the streets, you could see and even get a feel for how differently people were coping. Some were genuinely quite terrified and fearful and apprehensive. Meanwhile, others were more casual, seemingly just conforming with requirements because it was expected of them, and possibly just falling in line out of respect for other people that they recognised were being more troubled than they were. Throughout, we've seen a huge variation in the responses of different individuals to the exact same danger. Clearly, different people perceive risky situations in widely different ways. Now, this is exactly what we should have anticipated from the psychological research into individual differences in risk personality, but it is nevertheless rather striking. The risk type compass is a psychometric measure of risk personality. Everyone can be placed somewhere within this 360-degree space, and underpinning that circular space are two axes, each of which is associated with the sensations we experience when dealing with risk and uncertainty. The first risk type compass scale is about how emotional people may be and how strongly reactive they are to these events, versus those who seem extraordinarily calm and composed. The second risk type compass axis runs between those of us who are totally reliant on things being orderly, systematic, procedural and predictable. People who like to know exactly what's going on and for whom everything has a proper place and considers that there's a proper way to do everything. At the other extreme from these people, who are in effect trying to organise uncertainty out of their lives, there are people that actually love uncertainty. They actually enjoy not knowing what will happen tomorrow and are not at all perturbed by things that are ambiguous, unclear, or vague. In fact, they rather revel in disorder and disruptions of routine because they enjoy seeking out the positive opportunities that arise when things are in that state of flux. Now, everybody can be placed somewhere within this 360-degree space created by these two axes according to their risk dispositions. Although the risk type compass is continuously incremented throughout, for purposes of interpretation, the 360-degree space is divided into 8 different risk type segments. 4 of these are defined by those 4 extremes I've just mentioned, and the others are in-between positions that are influenced by the interaction between the risk types on either side. Each risk type has its own meaning, its own vocabulary, and its own distinctiveness. So, although the epidemic was a challenge that we all shared, the personal experience of it from individual to individual was anything but universal. I want to talk about our experiences of the pandemic as it relates to the risk type compass, the opposite poles of which experience life in entirely and implausibly different ways. In a very real sense, each risk type lives in their own parallel universe of fears, worries, anxieties, and apprehensions, their own hopes, expectations, desires for excitement, their need for order and continuity, their love of variety and quest for opportunity, change, and innovation. And so, in the course of the next 4 talks, we'll have a look at the distinctive differences between those dramatically different experiences of the coronavirus. 4 different worlds of risk, uncertainty, heightened awareness, and even opportunity.